What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another video. A lot of things that are happening this weekend. DC fandom's going down, and I decided to do a little fan art. One of my favorite characters, Hawkman, and I decided to record it and share with you guys the process and talk over a little bit about the creative decisions that I made, some of the process. This is going to be quite fast. The video is about 15 minutes long, and I kind of crunched the time. I spent about 4 hours into this, but I did want to show you guys some of the creative aspects and talk a little bit about some of the decisions that I made and some of the process. So as usual, I started from a sphere, or in this case, I started from a base mesh. And this mesh you can get on the website, characterartworkshop.com. is one of just a base human base mesh. And here I'm quickly just kind of sketching out the helmet. And I'm going to spend the most of the time on the helmet here because I think it's the most important part of this character. And a lot of things that I'm doing are masking the details, try to very quickly put in the forms that I want early on so I can kind of massage it into place and start to identify what I want to change and update on the design of this character, right? He has a very iconic helmet shape with kind of the hawk and the eagle shape, and I want to quickly drop those stuff in there, very kind of comic accurate, and the techniques are very simple here. I'm masking it out, moving it in place, pretty much masking and moving in the clay brush inside of ZBrush. And really just trying to get the shape. And you can see initially it was kind of all over the place, and even here I'm just kind of drawing the feathers into place, but I can quickly get the shape into something that feels a little more accurate to what I'm thinking. And having the head inside of the head, the helmet, excuse me, does help me just try to keep things in proportion. I don't want to sketch everything into just the one mesh because I want to make sure I have things inside. So I'm starting with a face, kind of a base mesh that has some interesting proportions, right, to begin with. And then as I like some of the forms, as I get some of the forms kind of closer into the shape that I want, then I'm extracting it. And you can see me extracting the pieces of, or either masking it and kind of splitting hidden, or just really like duplicating and deleting what I don't want from this. And I know this quite fast, or even if you're a beginner into ZBrush, these may seem confusing, but make sure you go back and watch some of my other videos and you're gonna kind of understand some of the process here. I think this video is mostly for us to talk about the design and for you to see the process like a little faster, just so you can kind of understand like where I'm spending my time on. I don't want to be polishing one area until it's perfect, because when you're designing in 3D, you want to make sure you have as much as you can kind of represent it, so you can just keep iterating on it. Like, you don't want to spend a lot of time just polishing up the wings of the helmet, because that might not even be the design that you want for your character, or the design that's going to be the best for what this character needs. So I'm kind of quickly just throwing all the shapes in there, and then some of the things that I didn't like before, it may be just fine, like they maybe not be the center of the attention for the design, so I'm not spending a lot of time on it. And the same thing for details. Like, details are not important when you're trying to design something. Details are mostly just how much time you spend on it. And you see, I think, the difference from when you're sketching in 3D to try to get the forms, try to understand the shapes, and the final detail, like polish level, is just how much time you spend on it. I can, start splitting up the pieces into smaller pieces and then, refining it. And of course, it's going to take me days and weeks to get something to that quality. Over here I'm mostly focusing on the overall design and just trying to kind of identify the design. And you see the techniques I'm using are very similar to what I said in the beginning. A lot of masking, a lot of just kind of damn standard to kind of cut out the design, and then just refining with H polish or something like that. Another thing that's interesting here that I often get questions about is just poly paint, is throwing colors into the model. I try to do it as soon as I can. I like to work with colors because it just gives me an understanding of how how the design is working. If this was all gray, I'm purely looking at the sculpting, and it just doesn't work. Like, your eyes like wouldn't see as if you had color in it. So that's why I try to throw it as fast as I can. And you can see at this point here, I was struggling a little bit with the design of the top of the helmet. And that's another thing for you to keep in mind, to always keep it kind of somewhat simple and messy in a way, because I erased this top part at least 3 times, and I did it again. And that's why I'm trying to just quickly throw some of the designs in there, so I can you know, not be completely married to anything, so I can always go back and erase it. And that's something that's very important, especially when you are working in a production, to not get attached to anything. You need to be able to quickly sculpt something in there, quickly design something in, and be fine with iterations, be fine with different options. You know, not more often with the first thing you've done, it's not going to be the best, you know, that you can do. So, you know, I go back and change it a lot. I think the HAWKMAN helmet is very iconic. You know, there's a couple different versions of you know, that have been done in the comics. So I'm trying to mix some of that into this, and then as they get to a point, you know, that's kind of further along, I just stop looking at reference, and I just kind of go with my kind of my taste in a way. Like I just try to redesign things. I go with like forms that are working. I start looking into shapes that are interesting on the helmet, flows that I can kind of change. Then I'll stop looking at reference, and I think that's when I think my own take would start to come in, and I'll come up with something new. So that's a little technique that I use for when I'm redesigning characters like this. So moving on to the body, like I knew I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the body here, but the technique is the same. Like I'm masking things out, I'm you know, kind of extracting pieces, I'm doing all that kind of stuff to try to quickly get, you know, something in there. I was looking at this point, I was looking at a lot of the like just Aquaman, the take that DC did on the Aquaman costume. Like I knew that I want to make something that, you know, will kind of fit on that, you know, fit with that, excuse me. So I was looking at some of the early Aquaman gear that he had and the kind of treatment that they did. I think DC has been doing a lot of kind of a different take on a treatment for the armors in their movies. So it's interesting to see, and that's where this arm kind of you know, kind of style comes from. There's a lot of this kind of wrapping. It's a little more random wrapping in my opinion, but it kind of works for what they did with the you know, the Momoa's Aquaman design. So I was trying to replicate some of that, and then of course looking at some other, you know, his comic iconic gear, and seeing how much I could bring that into the design. So I think the end result here was a mix of you know, both of those things. And then, like I said, after a certain point, I'll just stop looking at reference, and you know, I just start kind of going with the flow here, just trying to design something new with what I would like to see on the character. And I think the result is quite cool. Like all my other projects, I don't think you know, any of the final designs I'm like completely happy with it. I think it's just one more take on something like this. You know, I would love to go back and kind of do what I do professionally, where I just do a lot of different options until we pick something that feels nice, and then I'll spend the time really getting it to polish. Like even pieces like this, I could have, you know, dozens of pieces to add to it. Like right now it's just a simple primary shapes just to get the design working, but I could easily go in there and spend the time to like polish it up, extract different pieces. The same thing here, I'm just throwing some details in there, and you know, in a production, or if I would spend more time on this, I'll go back and just create an alpha for something like that. But in this case, I just wanted some information in there, so I just kind of drew some kind of pattern. And again, looking at some of the Aquaman stuff, they had some of the stuff in there, so I was just trying to replicate, but I was following a little bit more of a falcon shape. If you look at some of the HAWKMAN comics, like they do kind of that falcon wing design in some design elements. So I just try to do similar to the Aquaman, but like taking his icon into consideration. So I think the result was kind of interesting. And again, in the final shader with the render, it was supposed to be very, very dark metal, so I didn't want to spend too much time on that. And that goes back to what we talked about, just where do you spend the time. So just kind of keep in mind, I'm always thinking about that, so I can finish up some of these projects, like sketches or concept sketches, in you know, a little quicker, so I can do more of them. In the production, I'll do probably, you know, a few different takes, and then when we pick something, I'll go and start refining it. Another thing I forgot to talk about is also, like, you see when I did the arm and kind of the wrappings, they're all clay tubes, and the best way to do that in here would be to just kind of like start extracting those kind of straps as a separate meshes. But in here, again, I just wanted something quickly to demonstrate that, so I just used the clay tubes, and then with the inflate brush, I went in the edges and kind of pushed out the edges for those wraps, and I think the result is quite cool. It wouldn't work for production, I think. I mean, I would have to go in and start just polish it up more and kind of refine it, but it gives a very nice result here. In terms of anatomy, I am using my base mesh, so the anatomy is quite in place. If you haven't seen the tutorial where I create this from scratch, go in my website and check it out. But in here, I'm just doing or redoing it, the kind of final polish passes on that. Like, I'm using them standard and kind of drawing the muscles a little better, like trying to get that stuff in place, trying to get something that, you know, just feel polished, but the anatomy was already there. For the scars, I'm just using inflate, getting the little scars in there very quickly, and then I'll start texturing. You know, for texture here, one of the techniques that I usually use for my projects is, you know, a lot of poly paint, and I use a couple alphas to get some breakup. So you can see here I'm using like a very contrasted alpha to get some interesting patterns, and mixing that with masks. So I'll mask by cavity, and I'll use that cavity to like drive some of the kind of green details on the skin. In the metal, you know, I'll use that cavity to just kind of pop some of the details off the metal, and then I'll decimate everything, and I'll bring into 3ds Max. And in this case, I've used brought in with poly paint, so I can kind of drive that texture information with the vertex color. And then we talked about this before. It's a very kind of straightforward technique. It gives me a quick result in the Max, and it's the same technique that, you know, you could use on Keyshot or any other software. I like to use Max, in this case Arno, because I have a little more understanding into how the shaders work in Max. So it's more of a preference, but it's the same thing. You could use Keyshot, you know, you could use VOA, or you could use you know, any software that would take, you know, poly paint information. You could bring it in. And here it's a very simple setup with an HDR, and then just some key lights to create some interesting kind of lighting scenarios. But in this case, it's very simple. It's just one key light and a couple backlights, but they're very, very soft. So now going back into ZBrush, one thing I forgot, or not forgot, but I kind of jumped ahead just to try the render, was the wings. And the one thing I want to just mention is just be careful with the rendering, because that could take a lot of time if you're just not paying attention right into what you're doing. We can talk about this in some other videos, but you know, I came back to ZBrush and I wanted to show you guys how I was going to create the wings. So initially I made a quick block out for just the shape of the wing, very, very rough, just to kind of try to get the scale and position. And then I went into another little scene and started making some feathers, and the feathers are very straightforward. I wanted a couple different variations of you know, what they could be, so I made 3 different ones, a small one, a medium, and a large, and then I decimated them just so they're kind of light into the scene, and then I'll start placing them around. Again, I'm doing this just for this shot, just for this angle. If I were to do this for a kind of production, T-pose, whatever it is, I will use the same techniques, but you know, I'll just spend more time and do it in a different pose. In this case, you know, I'm using it on the same that kind of just the pose, just because I knew that this was going to be the what I would use for the final shot. So same technique, just I guess different target here. So I'm quickly duplicating it around with using control, like control click, control move. I'll create another object, and then can easily just kind of rotate them in place, kind of create some interesting shapes, and then very quickly I can build a kind of wing shape, you know, with the pieces that I had. Now, you know, it is very clear that this is kind of a little more of a destructive workflow, or if I wanted to go back and, oh, let's, change a shape of a feather, I would have to go back and just redo it, right? Because they're not instances. I'm just literally just duplicating in shape, duplicating it into the shape of the wing. So here again, I'm just kind of sketching into that one main topology, main geometry that I had, just so I know where to place the feathers. And this goes really fast. Like I think I spent probably 30 minutes into this, and the result's quite nice. So after I did that, it is just a matter of then kind of decimating it, the rest of it. I'm gonna mirror it to the other side. And again, the back view is completely broken, right? Like you guys have seen, I'm not worrying about the back view at all. I'm always kind of rotating it just to make sure it works. It's working on all the angles, because of course lighting is going to react to this. So I need to go back and make sure it's working. But I exported it to max, did another render, and now it's time to then bring it all into Photoshop to do the final composition. And you can kind of quickly see here, I'm going to go through the layers and just talk about them. I did some value tweaks just to kind of bring the darkness a little down into the lower part of the wings. And then using masks, I extracted, kind of skin shader, and then I just started to do some final polish on that in Photoshop. You can see here just kind of knocking down some of the specular, and then with the spec map, I'm bringing that back in and having more control. Knocking down some of the metal, popping out the eyes, adding the background. Very, very straightforward. And then, the final thing is just kind of final touches on the model. And final touches is literally just kind of going in there, adding some highlights, adding some noise, going in, popping out some of the hard edges that didn't come through, as I wanted. And then final kind of tweaks, color correction, small stuff, just to try to get everything to pop. And I'll do another video in the future just talking about some of the techniques for color correction and things that we could do to make it, to kind of enhance the final product. All right, guys, I hope you guys liked it. Check out the other videos. I'm going to do more of these in the future, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.